Trends 2024 report. I'm Danette Bredenbach, Bizcommunity's marketing and media editor. Today, I'm delighted to be chatting with the award-winning strategic trend forecaster, Nicola Cooper. Nicola is an in-house trends analysis and cultural strategist at 99 Cents Communications. She's also the founder of her own consultancy, specializing in the fields of fashion, lifestyle, and pop culture, especially for retail and FMCG brands on the African continent and worldwide. Nicola, we are so excited you could join us again this year. You're a firm favorite of the Biz Trends family. This year, you're going to be sharing your beautiful new exclusive insights report on Trendscape 2024, navigating the future of fashion, society, and tech. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
I thought we could just kick off by having a look at the background to why you did this report and perhaps some of the methodology involved.
Well, as you know, technology is advancing in sort of dramatic strides and it's impacting every industry. I think, how we look at ChatGPT or those kinds of spaces and how they're altering writing or anything else, in the same level, technology is impacting fashion, from NFTs to the metaverse and what launched as the Metaverse Fashion Week. I think that it's really critical for us to stay abreast of trends that are going to assist us in either marketing fashion or repositioning fashion for a new sort of hybrid world where it is online and offline and it all blends seamlessly together.
So let's start off with fashion, or shall we call it pop culture? How is pop culture influencing fashion press, pop culture, and what trend is coming out of that going forward?
Well, I think, pop culture and youth culture and fashion trends or trends have always been integrated. We refer to it as the trickle theory. So it will trickle down from your sort of gatekeepers, which is your media, television, influencers, fashion magazines, but it also trickles up from the street or from the every person. So I think platforms such as TikTok and Instagram are now giving us exposure to a rather like vast and diverse sort of sphere and vision of fashion. And I think that aligned with things like e-commerce, as well as AI and filters and those kinds of things, it really is shifting in leaps and bounds.
I find that really fascinating. And what I found very interesting in the last few years that I've seen a trend coming about is where culture in terms of music and fashion and that kind of thing coming out of Africa and going into the rest of the world. Is that a growing trend? Will we see more and more of that? What does it mean for the continent?
Even you speaking about that gives me goosebumps because it's something I've been advocating pretty much for the majority of my career. But I think what is happening at present, and I think we see this with Taylor, with her track like nominated for a Grammy, and her just taking the global space by storm, is that we as Africans, and whether it is a young designer or a young musician, we're not only recognizing our value, because I think with our past, we discounted our value and our voices. But what we're starting to do is going, well, actually, I have something to say, and it's unique, and it's me, and it's a new voice of Africa. But it's not just relevant from Africans to Africans. It's actually something that the world needs to hear. And I think that's really elevated the confidence in ourselves and the value that we think, that we know we bring to a global audience. So I think it is, this understanding of like, okay, cool, we have underestimated ourselves, we've discounted ourselves, now we're starting to understand ourselves and the necessity of our voices, but also how we can impact through aesthetics, through sound, through critical discourse, all of those facets, clothing, designers, and I really think, it just takes, one African person to break through this invisible wall, and what that does is it opens the path for many to follow.
A few years ago, I remember people talking about Africa rising, and it felt like it never really quite happened. But perhaps we weren't looking at it in the right way. Perhaps we were looking at it as a political kind of thing. And what you're describing is more of a pop culture, taking African culture and stories to the world. So we see this growing. What about the other way around? We've always had other culture influence us, and we, as you're saying, we don't value our own, and we look outside and we see that as more valuable. Is that changing? Are we still looking up to that culture? How is that dynamic working?
Well, I mean, obviously, we still look to other cultures that are more westernized or Americanized. But what we are starting to see is there is a shift towards not only us understanding our contemporary African aesthetic and our contemporary African sounds, but from those looking in. So when you look at someone like Beyonce, who really, really has sort of delved into African culture, not only has she collaborated with African artists, but in a lot of her music videos and in terms of her films, she's utilized African designers, African filmmakers, in the same way as something like Black Panther utilized the African aesthetic. So it's not just us borrowing from the West now, it is the West borrowing from us, but more so than a cultural appropriation manner, like we're just going to take your aesthetic and replicate it. It's more on a collaborative basis. And what's quite wonderful, I mean, there is a young designer called Tepe Magugu who won the LVMH prize a number of years ago, which is the Louis Vuitton group. And, he has this beautiful aesthetic that's rooted in his own family heritage, where he's from in Kimberley, and he's making garments that have been worn by Rihanna, Michelle Obama. It is insane in terms of how the West is looking in now to Africa for inspiration. And it's something that they've done in the past, but now it's a different manner. They're not culturally appropriating and taking it outside. What they're doing is looking inside and empowering those people and purchasing from African designers rather than replicating African design in America.
I really love that it's a collaboration rather than an appropriation. What is the role of tech in this? What is the role it's played, and how do you see this going forward?
Tech is incredible in this space, and what it did is it opened geographical boundaries. Now, when we used to have access to information in terms of trends, it was usually 6 months behind. Now, people are getting access to trends in real time, the adoption of trends is in real time, and we have a technologically savvy continent. We have one of the largest mobile media markets in the world. Our people utilize mobile phones on a daily, even when we believe that they have no access to data. They will hustle and they will find. And I think what that's done is opened the world to them. It's also opened the world to other communities and communities of support and dialogue and discourse and sharing of ideas, sharing of aesthetics. So for us, on this kind of southern tip of Africa, the whole world is ours. And it's something that I explain to sort of young business people or young designers and those going into the space. The minute you go online, you are international. You are not just local, and local is lekker. You now have the world at, in your oyster. It's really readily available, and if you can figure out a way to cut through the noise, especially because we have such a unique point of differentiation to bring to the world, we're going to inspire and we are going to grow as a continent.
That's very inspiring, especially for young people, especially on a continent that is very young. And then also a continent perhaps where traditional jobs are lacking, or there's quite a bit of unemployment. And so opportunities for young people are really looking to things like tech, and those kind of opportunities. And we've seen some lovely success stories, as you've mentioned. Which brings me to the other part of your report, the society part. What are the trends we're seeing in society? And I'm imagining that everything is coming together and influencing each other. How does this affect us?
Well, I mean, obviously, when we're looking at the societal impacts, the other sort of facets of that are influenced, you know, almost interchangeably so. Which is, you look at politics, you look at the economy, you look at the environment, you look at technology, and that all impacts society. So it really is understanding where we sit at the moment as South Africans and Africans. What are we impacted on a daily basis? I mean, load shedding, inflation, those kinds of things where, I mean, globally, I think we are losing, from a global perspective, 18% of our salaries due to inflation. That's an astronomical amount. So when we're looking at young people who have either new jobs or are studying, they're already starting side hustles that potentially could grow into fully fledged businesses or even collaboration or acquisition. So it's really quite lovely. And I mean, what I've seen when working with global brands is that they're really looking into Africa in terms of how they can innovate with African people and with young African people. And I think that there's really those critical conversations about looking at ingredients, looking at aesthetics, looking at the innovation of what young people are coming up with. So I think from a societal sort of space, this also gives people access to new things and new ways of thinking. In terms of young people developing businesses, the introduction to Amazon in South Africa is going to then open them up to new consumers. Equally so, in some of the offerings that Amazon is bringing from, an employment perspective, there are sometimes, I mean, one of the entry-level jobs is you don't need a degree. You need a matric and 1 year of experience, and you would be earning 13,000 Rand a month. So it's also looking at, how that's going to shift, what that potentially means for our middle class, at this really necessary time where people are struggling for jobs. Like, what are global conglomerates bringing in terms of that facet?
The other side of that, for me, is what does it mean for retail brands and for FMCG brands in particular? And what are the trends there going forward?
Well, it's really critical to understand that retailers are a little bit difficult to move, and that's because their infrastructures have, been around for such a long time, and change is happening so quickly. So it really is getting people in the mindset of being flexible and being able to adapt quickly and being able to sort of turn things around quickly. And that's why we're also seeing a lot of retailers bringing back manufacturing onto the continent, because turnaround, cost effectiveness, those kinds of things are really in their mind. So if we see a trend, we are able to replicate it a lot quicker, because you are not waiting for manufacturing on another continent and then shipping and those kinds of things, and what happens with shipping due to wars and disruptions and COVID and all those things. So what we're seeing is quite a dynamic shift in terms of how we are going to be producing our products, then investing in localized products and supporting more localized products, collaborating, acquiring. So there is a different mindset, because I mean, it's something that I've been asking my clients for a very long time, is, if say per se H&M can bring it in faster and cheaper, why should I care? Why should I support you? Because at the end of the day, if you are replicating the same thing that I can get faster and cheaper, there's just a no-brainer in that. So what is it that we are adding? What is the value from a South African retailer? And we're re-looking the concept of value, whether it is the extra savings with Checkers and ShopRite. 79% of youth will subscribe to a reward system. So it's looking at that, or looking at buy now, pay later, which is really driven by younger consumers or those with existing debt, to be able to pay it off on a period of time, interest-free. So it's really important for our retailers to start implementing these different ways in which our consumers are reacting. And that adaptivity is really critical. And that means breaking down those kinds of really embedded ways of working, breaking down those silos, and making our business a lot more flexible, a lot more quick to adapt and shift and change.
What is the role of technology in retail and being able to produce goods faster, being able to meet the needs of consumers, given that consumers are online, they're on their mobile phones, it's really where they are. Are we starting to play in the space more? Are we understanding it as retailers? And what is the trend in that going forward?
I mean, we do understand, and we do understand that every platform has a necessity and a way of speaking and its own language and its own visual language. So I think it's really critical that we are starting to understand that what works on one platform no longer works on all platforms, and how we can generate this kind of conversation, because there's so many platforms, and then you're looking at sort of costs and different content, and whether it's snackable content here or long form content. Is it a TV ad? Is it a digital ad? Those kinds of things, and understanding that from a retail perspective, because I think we were treating it as more of a blanket approach in the past, and now understanding, TikTok, you've got a certain amount of attention span versus Facebook, which is more community and peer driven. So it's how we utilize that, and as well as utilizing chatbots and AI and sizing systems to assist where we know that we need them. And that's really, and as well as data. So for someone like myself, where data is critical, it helps us understand our consumers and their needs a lot better. So we track the patterns, we track purchasing patterns, we look at culture and how culture is impacting that, and as well as sales. So there's a number of different facets now. It's not just about the bottom line, it's how it all works together and how we can utilize data in a manner that humanizes data, because at the end of the day, a consumer is still a person. So it's really critical to understand at the end of the day, even though we're speaking on so many different platforms, the recipient is a real human being.
I think what you say is very true. It's very important to remember that we are human, and yeah, the tech is there to help us and benefit us. We hope. What would you say are the top three trends that you are looking at for next year? And I think maybe in particular looking at technology and retail.
I definitely believe that AI is going to change the landscape. Even in terms of like using something like ChatGPT to generate posts and post languages on different platforms. AI is going to be utilized in terms of the analysis of data, but equally so, things like AI influencers and digital influencers, those kinds of elements are really coming into play, utilizing, the metaverse, the gamification of content, as well as, what we've been really looking at 99 cents is the difference between infotainment and edutainment. So that additional add of value that's beyond just product and price. How we can really add to our consumers' lives in the retail space, because most of us research online before we even enter a retail space. We're checking things out, and we comparing prices and those kinds of things, and also how we can integrate that all together seamlessly to generate a holistic experience for our consumers.
So there was a lot of hype about the metaverse and people have bought into it. But recently I've been seeing some articles and some sounds about the metaverse perhaps not actually living up to what everyone thought it would be. And NFTs also not quite living up to their hype. Um, People who had bought art are now unable to sell that art. What do you think about that, and how do you see this panning out in the future?
It's super interesting because last year I attended the Dubai Future Forum, and as you know, the Arab Emirates is very, very, very innovative. And in one of the opening speeches, they said, we will try something, and even if we lose money doing so, we are still learning. And I think that's a really critical part for South African businesses to know that even if you fail, and I mean, when we look at the metaverse or we look at NFTs, even if they fail, what that's done is allowed us to experiment in that space. And there needs a certain kind of brevity to just try and allocate budget to potentially lose. But what that does is that there's no real loss if you're learning and adapting and utilizing those. I mean, we refer to it as failing forward. I mean, you're constantly moving forward. I think what we need to understand a lot of the time, even when we're looking at global trends like the metaverse or NFTs, is that in South Africa, we are very reactive rather than proactive. And this is coming to a time where we actually have to be brave, and as retailers start experimenting and playing in those spaces and testing those spaces. And they may or may not work, but it's really worth investigating. I think that that's what's quite critical, and a lot more businesses are now sort of integrating these innovation hubs within in-house. We've got TFG that's got an innovation center. ShopRite and Checkers has just done sort of an innovation center around technology. So what we're starting to see is a lot more people planning for the future and planning to learn in those spaces equally so.
So I think to finish off, perhaps you could give us your most important trend or message to business out there that they need to pay attention to as they move forward.
I think, from my perspective, when I'm looking at reporting and specifically cultural strategy, it is on the basis of humans. And at the end of the day, I think that many businesses need to understand that they should be consumer centric and that they shouldn't continue to make assumptions on who their consumers are. Rather base it on clear evidence, statistics, learnings, sales, and all of those components to paint a very, very accurate picture of their consumers, to understand their everyday, their basket size, but also what their aspirations are. Because even though there might be a price sensitive consumer, there still is dreams and aspirations and goals. And at the end of the day, it's really critical to tap into those needs because, like I said, it's not just about product and price anymore. It's the values of a brand. It's their ethos. It's what they stand for. It's transparency. It is ethics. It really is how I feel represented by the brand. Is it reflecting me as an African or a South African? So there's so many different facets that go into it, more so than did before, where it was kind of, if we build it, they will come. That those times have changed, and now it is like, okay, cool, I see the product, but what beyond that? What is beyond that? I think that's where retailers need to start investing, is understanding where their consumers sit on trend adoption, where they are sitting in the world, in society, and their goals and aspirations, so that when we do communicate with them or we do develop products for them, we are far more accurate in providing them what they need.
Nicola, thank you so much for all those wonderful insights. And thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you always for having me. It's such a privilege to be on the platform and something I honor dearly.
Thank you, Nicola. This is Danette Breitenbach. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you for another episode on another day.